Welcome, and thank you for joining me. This is Michael S. Seaver, and you're listening to Equal Chance to Be Unequal, my podcast about unlocking human potential through helping people disconnected from their purpose uncover and live their purpose. This is episode 4, Engaging the Millennial Generation. So over the last couple of months, I've been working on a variety of projects and able to travel around the nation in regards to talking about what is it that larger corporate entities can be doing to engage the millennial generation. And there's a couple things that have led to this. Back in May of 2016, I worked with a couple of organizations to publish a white paper, which I'll describe here in a few minutes. I've been receiving lots of questions from the folks that I serve, the clients that I'm serving locally and nationally. And there just seems to be a little bit more of a focus in and around this, especially because within the last couple of months, Gallup has come out with the 2017 version of the State of the American Workplace. If you haven't read this report, looked at it, checked it out, I would encourage you to go to gallup.com and try to find the State of the American Workplace report, because it's such an interesting look at how are humans doing inside of very rigid hierarchical corporate structures, when in reality that's not really what humans were meant to do. I've also published a blog about this recently, I think a couple months ago. Put a blog out there on my website, michaelseaver.com. The blog's title is Every Generation Has Been the Me Generation. And I go through a couple of examples of some language that was utilized or some perceptions of how previous generations has perceived the generation that follows them. And I gave some examples from the 1968 Life magazine article where a silent generation person was saying some not so positive things about a baby boomer. And then I used the example from the July 1990 Time magazine article where a baby boomer was saying some not so polite things about Generation X that was following them, of course. And then, of course, you see it today in our society where baby boomers and Generation X persons say an awful lot of not so nice things about millennials. And what we really have forgotten, I think, as a society, and I'll get to this a little bit later in this podcast, is that the external environment around a person is a far bigger predictor of his or her success or competence than purely just looking at that individual and the content of his or her character. And so it's something called fundamental attribution error, and I'll look at that here in a little bit. But it's just important to recognize that obviously there's a lot of this discussion in the mainstream media, and it's just really important that we look at what is the millennial generation doing that's different from previous generations, because honestly it's not that different, but what has changed is the context and the environment around them. Whereas more experienced generations didn't have the internet, and they didn't have access to mobile devices, and they didn't have access to free knowledge and education, because previous generations definitely had to gain access to those things through the news media, through newspapers, and through traditional hierarchical university education. And many of those things are irrelevant today. And what we can now figure out ways to be able to get many of that, those pieces of information, much of that data through very, very complementary or simple routes. So in today's podcast, I want to look a little bit at some statistics about the millennial generation, just to give us some context, talk a little bit about some of those environmental trends that are affecting their path to leadership, or if they elect to work inside of a large corporation, or they elect to do something more entrepreneurial, if they elect to go serve in the military, if they elect to do something more vocational, whatever it is that they elect to do. Talk about some of the trends that are affecting their path towards that. A little bit of the research that I had done about what is it that actually motivates their attitude towards the current hierarchical structure. Talk a little bit about the research that I did into that, some of the interviews that I had done with individuals around our nation, really looking at saying, well, how is it that we've gotten to today, and why do they behave the way that they do? So the outcome of that report was what I call mass customization, and I'll describe mass customization to you, and how can a larger corporate entity create a la carte menus of items and create mass customization so that they can do a better job of engaging the millennial generation. And talk a little bit about mentorship and how does that, and actually reverse mentorship, and how does that impact a millennial's desire to want to work inside of your organization or work inside of a bigger company. And just to help us understand that it's not necessarily that millennials are in need of some sort of repair. What we really need to focus on is that the typical hierarchical environment, which was set up very, very well 100 years ago to serve the generations that did well in it, that particular environment is no longer necessary in our society. And that environment, that context is actually really in disrepair. And it oftentimes holds humans back from really truly accomplishing the various things that they would like to or can. It's about the external environment is a better predictor of a person's success than anything else. And right now, some of those typical structures that have allowed for humans to be successful in a very linear context are no longer needed in our society because we have lots of other methods and tools by which we can drive wealth production, or we can drive engagement in some meaningful way. As I mentioned earlier, back in May of 2016, I partnered with Robert Half, a very, very large staffing accounting firm, and something called the Financial Executives Research Foundation to develop and write a paper called Creating a Leadership Pipeline, Developing the Millennial Generation into Finance Leaders. And so for a number of months, we interviewed CFOs around the nation and interviewed faculty from a couple different universities, some senior executives within Robert Half. And what we came out with was essentially a 12-page report with about 22 sources, really looking for what is the thing that's going to allow for the best knowledge transfer from a baby boomer CFO down to a millennial finance professional. And it really came down to just a couple of really, really basic things, is that if there was a meaningful relationship between the more senior executive and the younger finance professional, if we created three things. Number one, if we created some sort of feedback loop that happened daily or weekly, and the younger person, the millennial, had a chance to be able to see how they were doing or gauge their own performance, it was a much, much better chance that he or she was going to be able to climb the ladder appropriately to be able to fill the more senior executive shoes. Number two is if we could create an environment where the organization provided for continual learning opportunities, there was going to be a much, much better chance that the millennial would want to stay in that environment or actually develop into that finance leader. So continual learning could be books, it could be mentorship, it could be university classes, it could be certificate programs, it could be massive open online courses. There's so many things that an organization can offer to the millennial, but we have to create those structures and make sure that they're there. And then the third thing, again, is the mentorship piece. If there isn't a formal or structure for mentorship and reverse mentorship inside your organization, it'd be very, very difficult to engage a millennial who needs the relationship and needs the feedback in order to learn as much as possible. Now, remember, millennials don't necessarily need to learn via traditional rote memorization inside of a university classroom setting. They prefer to learn far more immersively and far more experientially. So by creating these structures and systems that allow for them to learn in real time on the job, you're going to save yourself an awful lot of money by not having to have them go through typical university structures or systems, but you're going to create real-time learning on the spot in the moment. And that is exactly what they need. That's exactly what they want. They want that impact as quickly as they possibly can have it. And that's a very simple tool or method by which to create that. So again, this Creating a Leadership Pipeline paper, developing the millennial generation into finance leaders, really just about, are we providing daily and or weekly feedback to the millennials on our team? Are we giving them learning opportunities that happen continually? Number three, do we have specific mentorship and or reverse mentorship systems in place inside of our organization to give them lots of learning opportunities where they can form relationships and advance the organization's objectives really quickly? So then, okay, let's look a little bit at the generation and some of the statistics for those of you listening. For some context, the millennial generation are those individuals who were born between 1980 and the year 2000. Goldman Sachs had done some research, and as of a 2015 United States Census, the millennial generation, that group between 80 and 2000, there's 92 million people in America that fall into that group. I believe that the second highest was the baby boomer generation, and there's roughly, I think, 77 million of them. So it is, the millennial generation is already the largest percentage of the American people, but they're also, as of 2015, the largest percentage of the workforce, meaning they're the largest generation in the workforce, according to a Pew Research article. Adobe Digital Index had done some work and trying to figure out, well, what are some of the things that make them interesting or unique. And I found a statistic that Adobe Digital found that the average millennial has 7.7 connected to the internet devices. Could be a computer, could be a phone, could be some sort of a gaming system, could be some sort of a tablet or an iPad. They have all of these different ways in which they go to the web to connect with other people or to connect to information. to be able to advance their lives or their career. So they have way more tools or access to information than previous generations have ever had. USA Today has some statistics to show that of the millennial generation, this generation, those born between 80 and 2000, make 54% of all online purchases. And as I mentioned earlier, this idea of assets versus experiences, Eventbrite had been tracking and looking for some information about them, and they found that 78% of the millennial generation prefer in-the-moment experiences over the accumulation of assets or buying products. So we continue to move to this arena that as our society grows and advances, there's less need for goods production, or there's less need for selling things to people that they don't want. There's more of a desire to consciously create experiences that are memorable, that teach people things, and that advance their lives in some meaningful way. So for your organization, even if you do create products or services, you've got to find a way to engage the millennial generation through the creation of experiences so that they learn more about that product or service through the experience. In other presentations that I've given nationally with regards to millennials, trying to find some data about what is referred to as push versus pull media. And in an article that I found in Forbes magazine, the author had found was that only 1% of millennials allow advertising or follow advertising to trust a brand. And so there's a very, very significant distaste in the mouth of most millennials because they don't believe typical corporate or organizational advertising. They believe it to be very inauthentic and basically all spin to be able to sell a product or service to them. And they find that to be very inauthentic and they don't like it. Socialchorus.com had found the number to be 6% believe advertising is credible. HubSpot did some similar work, and they only found that 16% of millennials find traditional push advertising to be credible. We have to look at that and say, okay, so the messaging that we currently send down to people who are our consumers, the vast majority of millennials, who are the biggest percent of the American workforce and the biggest percentage of people in America, they don't believe that push traditional advertising anymore. And so we have to continue to consider and to think about what are those other methods and ways by which we can engage them in a meaningful way. And so I found some other statistics. 33% of millennials read a blog before they choose to purchase. Only 3% watch TV, read magazines, or read books from another source. So you're looking at an organization that currently has about $600 billion in spend capacity. And in about 3 or 4 years, that number is going to be 1.4 trillion. So if you really want to be ahead of the curve, finding ways to be able to engage them through influencer marketing or something that's more pull marketing can be far, far simpler. Figuring out ways to make that happen is very, very important for you as an individual, depending on what you're trying to accomplish for the organization that you work with. Now, a couple of trends with regards to millennials and how they're going to get to leadership. Robert Half had found some really, really interesting statistics to show that obviously in the last 10 years, many baby boomers had set themselves up for retirement. And then with economic uncertainty, they elected to not retire. So we've got the more experienced generations not retiring and not opening up paths to be able to allow millennials to have some of those VP or president or C-suite style jobs. And so millennials have had to get creative around finding other types of work or starting something entrepreneurial to be able to make the type of money or to have the type of growth that they desire. So because baby boomers are not retiring the same capacity or as quick as they have historically, it's a little bit harder for millennials to want to stay engaged inside of a specific organization or job. Gallup, of course, I've already referenced that once. They've got some data from their 2015 State of the American Workplace report that shows that I think about 28 or 29% of millennials at the time were engaged at their work as compared to the silent generation or traditionalists. I believe the number was 42 or 43%. So the engagement, right, the happiness of a young person inside the workplace is far less as compared to folks who are a little bit older and more experienced. So the trend with millennials, they're not necessarily happy inside the traditional corporate hierarchical structure. That's why you're seeing the move to things like holacracies. If you haven't ever learned much about holacracy, check out holacracy.org to learn a little bit about that model of governance and how companies are building themselves through holacratic models, not through traditional hierarchical models. Very, very interesting studies and reports there. Also, Goldman Sachs had found some interesting research that millennials are getting married later, 7 to 10 years later than previous generations. And then also something you probably have seen quite a bit just being out and about is that Aetna did some research and found that wellness is absolutely a daily commitment for the millennial generation on average, more so than previous generations. And there's probably a lot of different factors causing this, but thinking about baby boomers not retiring, engagement is lower in traditional hierarchical systems. We're getting married later, buying houses later because we've got school debt to be able to pay off. And then a bigger significant focus in on wellness and health is a very, very important thing. I mentioned earlier when we were getting started this idea of fundamental attribution error. And so what this is that we tend to see something bad happen to another person in our lives, and we automatically tend to say that this person's behavior is based on internal factors, basically the content of the character of that person, when in reality, we're underestimating the influence of external factors to that person. So if we say we see a person or a friend of ours who's having a really rough time, we tend to blame it on the content of the character or things that he or she is doing to make poor choices. But when those similar things are happening to us, we automatically have tendencies, as because of fundamental attribution error, to blame it on the environment directly around us, to say it was our spouse that made us do this, or I'm distracted by my kids, or my boss at work isn't treating me politely. We come up with a lot of different reasons as to why those things are affecting us, but we don't offer the same level of explanation to folks of other generations or people who are just around us. So when you see a silent generation person, a baby boomer, or a Generation X calling a millennial, lazy or spoiled or narcissistic or whatever, some of those things may be true in certain people. That's entirely possible. But we're not taking into consideration the external factors that are adjusting and or changing that millennial's behavior. And we still need to do some empathetic research around what is it that's happening in that person's life to understand why are they behaving the way that they are. But oftentimes we just say not so nice things about those persons without really understanding why they're doing what they're doing. The way that I like to look at this is that it's not so much that the millennials are narcissistic or that they have higher levels of self-regard. I look at this as something that is any young person throughout history, right? Any person between age, let's say 13 or 14 and 28 or 29 throughout history has likely had higher self-regard because they're going through what every single human goes through, and that's a self-discovery process. If you see a person at work or in your life who seems to be struggling, or they are changing boyfriends and girlfriends often, or they're changing jobs often, this is more a function of the fact that they're going through a self-discovery process and they're uncertain about what's next than anything else. So we have to give these individuals credit as they're trying to find themselves. So the difference between a person today is that cradle-to-grave employment, which was offered to baby boomers in the silent generation, isn't offered to young persons today. So they don't really have the same choice to go and work for a corporation and stay committed to that company and start a family at a young age and be able to buy houses and cars and things. Because what afforded baby boomers the chance to do that was the fact that there was a stable job available for them when they finished their education. Younger persons today do not have that. In fact, many are, of course, getting bachelor's degrees or master's degrees or advanced degrees, and they're saddled with $50,000 to $150,000 in debt, if not more, and there's no jobs in the marketplace. And so many of these folks have to figure out ways to make money in ways that are different. They jump from job to job to job. This is just trying to take care of really, really basic things in their life that previous generations never had to worry about because the cradle-to-grave employment was there. So another interesting resource here for you to consider is that a lady named Meg Jay, I believe the book was called The Defining Decade. She did a TED Talk, and the TED Talk is called Why 30 is Not the New 20. A very, very interesting look at how a person who's in their 20s is going through just really significant learning and development, and we need to give them that time for the opportunity to grow and to develop into the person that they're going to become thereafter. For a little bit more information about that, be sure to check out Meg's book, The Defining Decade, or go to TED.com and check out the talk, Why 30 is Not the New 20. A few things as I was working with the Financial Executives Research Foundation and with Robert Half was I was trying to figure out what is something that we can look at and say that all the generations that are in the workplace today are actually way more alike than they are dissimilar. And so I happened to find a book that was published, I believe, back in 2007 by a woman named Jennifer Deal, who I think still works for the Center for Creative Leadership. And just go to ccl.org if you'd like to learn more. But what was really interesting after looking at some of the research in her book was that she has 10 principles of ways that persons from all generations are the same. Now, I would encourage you to check out the book or find a summary somewhere on the web to look at these 10 principles. I'll just name a few really quick to help you understand that although the way that people who are younger react to things now is probably different than the way that a different or earlier generation reacted to something, the underlying principles that guide our behavior are essentially the same. So as an example, every single person on this planet wants respect. Now, the way that we go about securing that or getting that is different. Every single person on this planet wants to feel trusted and or be able to give trust to somebody. Pretty basic and simple, but oftentimes we don't take that into consideration when we're looking at a person who is changing something about their life. Number 6, according to Jennifer, is this idea that nobody really likes change, right? And in my work as an executive coach, I can confirm this. I mean, regardless of communication preferences or what motivates an individual or their life's experiences, if a change is bestowed upon them, the probability of them wanting to do it is very, very low. But if they take a stand or a part in the decision-making process of why that change needs to happen, the probability of them wanting to participate and facilitate that change for you, your company, or whatever is far higher. So again, nobody really likes change. So a couple more. Everybody loves to learn. So this was something that was true across all generations. Now, the tools in which we learned through have always been different. So for a person who is maybe a baby boomer, they might have had the news media, they might have had radio, they might have had a book, they might have had a university, access to a university somehow, but that has evolved and changed where now younger generations, again, they don't believe the messaging that comes from those portals or channels, so instead they go to the web and they will go to a Yelp review, or they'll look on Amazon.com and look at all the reviews of a product or service. We find ways to be able to get information basically for free. So MIT offers a lot of their coursework for free. You can go to Khan Academy or Coursera. Arizona State University now offers their full-time MBA for free. University of Illinois has an online MBA that's free. The way that we learn has evolved and changed away from you sit down in a classroom and have somebody talk down to you and tell you that this is the theory behind why you should do this, where in reality, what the millennials have done is they've bypassed theory and they have now moved right to immersive and experiential learning, where they can understand the theory at the same time as applying it in real life to a group of individuals that actually need that change and actually need that help. So instead of having to sit in a classroom for a semester, forgetting all the information, and then trying to go out and apply it in the workforce, the millennials have created an opportunity for themselves to be able to learn something and immediately apply it inside of a place, whether it's a not-for-profit or their job or some other thing that they're doing to fill their time. But it's just important that everybody wants to learn. Just the tools and the methodologies by which we do it have changed. And so Deal also found one of the other principles was that everybody wants a coach. Part of the reason why I've talked an awful lot about mentorship and reverse mentorship is that we all desire for continual growth and development, but we need access to individuals that can help us through that process. Now, I'm a big believer in this idea that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want a coach, maybe those 5 people that surround you change a little bit and they help to motivate you to become something different. But millennials have become very, very astute at this, and they're very heavily focusing on proactively reaching out to individuals in their network who they want to learn from and form relationships with over long periods of time. So it's very, very interesting that we all want coaches. Again, it's just how we go about securing them or gathering information from them. We as a society, we as a race, regardless of your age or generation, we all are actually really, really deep down inside very, very similar. Now, the way that we react to things today is very, very different from generation to generation because of the societal and external factors that help to shape us when we were being raised. So I wish that people would talk about this a bit more, because this is a really, really big determinant of how somebody is going to behave or go through processes today. But very few people are talking about how a person was shaped in their younger years to believe and to react to scenarios as they happen or pop up. And I just wish that would happen more. We would talk about that more openly as a society. So when I was doing the research through the Creating a Leadership Pipeline paper, some of the things that came out specifically about what motivates a millennial is that he or she does value personal growth, right? So for whatever it is that they're going to do, personally or professionally, they're going to have a desire to be challenged and to want to learn continually and to be curious about something and to do something that ultimately impacts their community and allows them to leave a legacy. We have to create structures and systems that allow these individuals to leave a legacy because they value that personal growth and they value that impact very deeply. They also do continually seek encouragement. So if you understand how the individual, the millennial, tends to want to receive appreciation, there's something called the languages of appreciation, which is very similar to the 5 love languages, which are both available on the web and very, very easy to understand. Which one of those 5 styles the millennial in your life might be, just ask him or her what they are or have them take the quiz. It's free. And you can find out what it is that they might want in terms of receiving appreciation or encouragement. And so for transparency's sake, I'm a words of affirmation guy. Very, very easy for me to feel encouraged or supported or engaged by you or what it is that you're doing if you just give me a very simple thank you, hey, I love you, I appreciate your comment about this. So for me, a word of affirmation via email, text, or phone call, something like that is very simple, but it's very encouraging to me. Some other people might like quality time. Others they love to receive gifts, and so maybe some sort of a gift is interesting to them. Some other people like an act of service. So and some people like physical touch, right? There's all these things that it can be, but figure out what it is that person needs to feel encouraged or appreciated. Figure out a way to be able to give that to them. That would be very, very helpful. What we've also seen a lot in the news media, the mainstream media, is that millennials tend to disfavor conformity, or they don't like to conform to traditional hierarchical systems and structures. And that's just purely because what had happened, 50, 60 years ago was that the corporation would provide cradle-to-grave employment to humans, and that just doesn't exist anymore. So why conform to a system that doesn't actually help you? It actually hurts you, right? We found out that Gallup thinks that only 33 or 34% of the American workforce actually like their job. They're actually engaged by their job. So conforming to something that is only going to lead you to 30% of your workforce being engaged is not a good percentage. So that's why millennials disfavor this conformity, is that they realize that why take a job that's not going to pay me what I'm worth and it's only going to make me 30% happy. So the conformity issue there is something that many large corporations are having to struggle with and create that mass customization, that a la carte menu of options to be able to engage the millennials by changing their work structure a little bit to allow them to not necessarily conform to what the company used to be 20 years ago, but create new structures and systems that allow them to be more project-based, to get a lot of meaningful work done in a short period of time, but not have to be in an office, in a chair, in a cubicle from 8 to 5. Because being in an office or a cubicle or a chair from 8 to 5 doesn't predict your engagement. It doesn't predict your productivity. There are various times throughout the day when humans are very productive. Look at Duke's. There's a professor there, Dan Ariely. He's got some great work. I believe the book is called Predictably Irrational. And if you look at his work, there are specific times during the day when the human brain is just very acutely aware, very focused, and very capable of getting things done. So I'm a big fan of creating structures and systems in my clients' lives that allow them to get very difficult projects and tasks done during that 2 to 3 hour window in the day when their brain is on fire. Most people won't do that. They'll think that they have to go to some office and sit there and try to get as much done between 8 and 5. I can tell my clients what to do during that 2 or 3 hour window, and they can get way more done than the average person would get done in 8 hours in that 2 hours, just because we've adjusted the way that they do the work in the day in a way that it really embraces the way that their brain functions. We don't necessarily have to be really conformist to something. Younger persons are always about finding new ways to be able to get basically the same, if not more, done through different means. I've already mentioned once before that they really do desire to have a positive societal impact. So millennials are always going to be thinking about what's the not-for-profit, or what's the B Corp, or what is the conscious capitalism movement that's going to help them have the most positive impact on society, because every generation has always wanted to create a better world for their children than their dad or mom did for them. So this is something that's not new to the millennial generation, just displayed differently in how the media portrays it to the marketplace. So millennials aren't that different than previous generations. They want to create a better world for their kid than they might have had via their parents. So again, societal impact is important to them, but I don't think that it's any different really than a previous generation person. Another big thing, as we've already talked about, millennials really wanting meaningful experiences. So they tend to want very subjective, very harmonious, very very friend-based, very relationship-based experiences. They're motivated by that. So if you want to engage a millennial, try to find a way to create those meaningful, subjective, and emotion-based experiences where they can hang out and spend time with other people that they enjoy learning from or being with and can have that societal impact. One of the other things we found out through the paper was that millennials actually do have pretty high expectations of themselves and those around them. And so it is really important that we think about, basically overtasking them with projects and things that will allow them to learn really rapidly, pair them with the right mentor, and do specific things that will allow them to fulfill the expectations that they have of themselves. But that also puts a little bit more of an onus on you as a leader to think about what are you doing to grow and develop your career, because if you're leading by example, the probability that you're going to have to continue to up your game and do bigger things and set higher expectations and achieve more goals is higher as well. So it's just important that we think about and understand what's going on in the mind of the millennial, understanding that they do care about growth and they care about that encouragement that they receive from you. They don't necessarily want to be conformist to an environment. They want to have the societal impact. They want those emotion-based experiences. And yes, they do have higher expectations. Understanding that and thinking about how does that impact how we lead individuals, it's critical. Now, I'm also a big fan of looking at this and understanding a little bit about looking at the anxiety level, that comes from many millennials. We probably have talked about, yes, there is a higher incidence of anxiety or nervousness or whatever from that generation. And so what I'm trying to do when I talk to folks that are of that generation is to remind them where they stand globally. And so according to Investopedia, if you were to rank all 7.8 billion people on the planet in terms of income or in terms of asset accumulation, in order to be in the top 1% of all global earners, every single person globally that's working, all one person has to do is earn $32,400 American in order to be in the top 1% of all global earners. It's not a very, very hard thing to see just how blessed you are. Even if you make $32,000, you're already in the top 1% of all global earners. Right-sizing a person's expectations or giving them some sort of context to drop their anxiety or to make sure that they're less nervous or worried about something, to say, hey, you've already been pretty blessed to date. Let's base our conversation and our growth and development on gratitude for what we've already been given to today, as opposed to being worried about keeping up some sort of a personality ethic or pretending to be something that you're not. So in the same article from Investopedia, they also talked about that the top 1% of earners in America, it's very different. They earned $434,700. And so obviously the United States is a very advanced nation in that context, because the amount that it takes in order to be in the top 1% of earners in America is far higher, right? It's almost $435,000. So it's a big number. With regards to the millennials and thinking about mass customization, which I've talked about a couple of times, there's a couple things here that I think are really important, what organizations or leaders or mentors can do to make sure that they are engaging younger persons, whether millennials or even now Gen Z, who is beginning to enter the workplace. And Gen Z is a person who was born after the year 2000. And so those persons are, 17, 16, 15 years of age, and they're beginning to enter into the workforce. And so some of the things that we're discussing today are important to them too, even though most of what we talked about is focused on millennials because they're the biggest percentage of the American workforce and of the American populace. With mass customization, or with customization of trying to engage them, there's a few things here that I want you to think about or consider. So we've seen in America specifically, but probably also in some other countries globally, is that the power has shifted from the large kind of corporate entity. It has shifted back to the individual. And what I mean by that is that any single person on this planet, the barrier to entry for them to be able to make that $32,000 that gets them to be in the top 1% of global earners, the barrier to entry to that is almost zero if they wanted to start their own company doing whatever they want to do. And so instead of us always having to go work for a large corporation, we no longer have to do that in order to be in the top 1%. We can start our own companies and we can work part-time and we can have all these things that allow for us to be able to do the things that we want to do in our own time. the power has shifted away from the traditional kind of hierarchical systems to things that are far more entrepreneurial, they're far more holacratic, they're far more conscious capitalism based. And so we have to be very, very cognizant of that shift, and that has basically been caused by the democratization of information. So we can log onto the web and we can learn anything about anything within seconds. And so because of that, it's very easy for any individual to form their own LLC and to start their own podcast and to do their own social media postings and to get processes to be able to coach or consult or to fire up some sort of a product or service for a client base. So because the power has shifted away from the large kind of corporate entity now to the person, any individual of any age or background, it's a big shift in the mindset towards how a millennial will want to accomplish his or her goals, because they have access to all the tools to afford them whatever life they desire to lead. I'm also a big fan, when we think of mass customization, some work that Daniel Pink had done a number of years ago, and I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I think it was called Drive, and I believe he published it in 98, 99, or early 2000. But what he found was that all humans have a desire. Basically, they want autonomy in their daily choice. They want to master some sort of profession or thing, and they want to feel a sense of purpose. And so Pink's done all this research for years and years and years and found that these are the three things that matter most to people. So if we can give them autonomy in their daily tasks, we can give them the capacity to master something and be great at something, and we connect their own life's purpose or their own personal mission to the mission of our organization or some sort of a cause, the probability of them being more engaged is far higher. So we as organizational leaders have to think about what structures and systems can we create inside of our companies to create autonomy, to create that mastery, and to connect their personal mission to the mission of the organization. If we do that, really, really significant opportunities for growth and development for those persons. Another thing here, and we've seen this probably thrown around quite a bit, is the idea of what's called the gig economy. Because cradle-to-grave employment doesn't exist anymore, we've now moved to this arena or this place where everybody has to become really, really great at essentially project work. And so we're always thinking about how do we create these highly personalized careers for these individuals so that they can always do the things that matter most to them, right? And more experienced generations, they were told that as soon as they finished school, they were allowed to go and work for some large corporation. So they essentially gave their personal mission or their personal brand to the brand of the company. Now, because the younger generations can't do that, they have to create their own personal mission, their own companies, their own personal brand, and they can be very, very selective in what they spend their time on, trying to figure out what their own personal mission is and how to find an organization that matches up with that as much as possible. So we've moved to a place of now what's called the gig economy, as opposed to just going to work for the same company over and over again. Another thing here with regards to how do we mass customize for younger folks is this idea of what's called social cohesion, and really your organization has to think about what's the organizational culture that's going to engage them. So if you want to really truly customize your culture or create something unique that a young person's going to want to come and work with, you have to think about social cohesion from the standpoint of what affinity groups and what projects and what fun activities and what extracurricular work, what are the things that you're going to do to get people from very diverse parts of your organization together to be able to be cohesive and to share information vulnerably with one another in a way that creates a very solutions or forward-looking mindset amongst the employee base. Because most hierarchical organizations are very structured, they're very siloed, they don't share information. But what millennials desire is a very socially cohesive environment where, regardless of what department you work in, there's a chance for them to be able to hang out by the water cooler or have lunch together or do something after work, like playing some sort of a sports league. Just do something, because that the development of that organizational culture is so critical to them wanting to work there, because the relationships that they form are way more important than a lot of other things that come from the workplace. Now, the other thing here, some people call it the work-life balance, some people call it work-life integration, but you're definitely seeing a really big shift here where many, many younger persons, many millennials, are wanting to figure out ways to have far more flexibility with their time so that what they perceive as being life, they can essentially share and do much of that at work. And so more previous generations were very wanting to keep work and personal stuff separate. Younger generations are much more about the matrixing of those two things together. And so many people ask me, as an executive coach, like, how do you balance, work-life integration? And I say, well, I don't ever work. I don't have a job. I mean, the stuff that I do is the stuff every single day that I've been wanting to do since I was a kid. I've always been wanting to help people. I've always been wanting to unlock their potential. I've always been wanting to do things. And it just so happens that the vast majority of time that I'm now doing that, I get to get paid for it, right? And I don't make a huge amount of money. But what's more important is that every single day, I'm spending a very large percentage of my time living my life's mission. And so that's the thing I think that many larger organizations are starting to understand, is that when the person identifies his or her mission, success is not what he or she is getting paid. His or her success is directly coming from the percent of their day that they're spending living their life's mission. We don't want to say that they're going to work, or that they're working from home, or that they're working at all. We want to make sure that the life that they lead doesn't feel like it's work versus what they do personally. It should all just become integrated into one. A couple of additional things here around customization. This is really, really basic stuff, but really important because I see a lot of executives make mistakes with it. Is number one, we don't respect, different types of communication. So the underlying goal of why we're communicating is the same. We want to feel appreciated. We want to feel trusted and respected. We want to feel like our work matters or like our lives matter. But for some reason, more experienced generations want to make fun of the fact that a millennial's, texting or using social media or whatever those things are. Again, the reason why they're using that tool is that the other traditional means are not affording them that appreciation or that encouragement or feeling respected by whomever that is. We also have a thing in our society, I see this a lot, where we tend to focus an awful lot on a person's mistakes as opposed to thinking about what is it that person learned through that process. And so I'm very okay with my clients, regardless of age, making a lot of mistakes in what they're doing, because there's a lot of learning that happens. So the more mistakes they have and do and participate in, the more that I can put them through something called the mindful engagement process, which allows them to learn really rapidly from those mistakes and apply that learning to other areas of their life. With regards to millennials, again, what I see a lot of baby boomer or early Gen X parents trying to do is to make their millennial and or Gen Z child a carbon copy of them. And so I believe it was Lewis Howes had done a podcast, and he interviewed a woman named Dr. Shefali Tsabari. And she talked an awful lot about how in Western society, what ends up happening is that if the parent isn't feeling overly happy about some part of their life up until today, they end up trying to make the child an idealized version of what the parent never was, right? So if the parent wanted to be in sports but was never able to because of some physical limitation, they try to make their child overly involved in sports so that they can live out their own, sports desires through their children. And so we have to be very, very cognizant of that, because I'm seeing more and more and more parents do that, is that they try to make the child the idealized version of what the parent never was. So I end up coaching quite a few executives who are frustrated with their children around that same idea, that same methodology, because that's not going to be the best use of that child's life, is not to become something the parent never was. So we have to really truly think about not making the millennial, whether it's a child of yours or whether it's an employee of yours, they are not going to be carbon copies of you, so it's not useful to try to make them that. So another thing that we have to consider here is we oftentimes try to compare one person to another, and that's a very ineffective way to engage a millennial. The better way to engage a millennial would not necessarily be to benchmark or compare them to somebody else in their department. It would be to compare them to who they were yesterday, and to ask questions around, what did you learn yesterday? What are you grateful for? Are you 1% better today than you were yesterday? And keeping them moving towards some bigger version of themselves that not only accomplishes their own goals, but it also accomplishes the organization's goals. And so trying to find that balance between a person needs for growth and development and how do we pair up that person's goals with what the organization's goals are, that is going to help so much. So it's really important that we find that balance for them. Now, one final thing that I'll mention under this idea of mass customization is that Center for Creative Leadership, who I've referenced already in this podcast, they had done some work with understanding what's referred to now as blended learning. And so instead of consciously forcing a millennial into an environment where they only learn via rote memorization and they only learn theory, we have to think of what's now referred to as the 70-20-10 rule. What we want is that only 10% of the millennials' learning should occur in a formal classroom or some sort of formal training where they are assessed or tested at the end of the end of learning. Again, only 10% of the human learning should come in that context. 20% should come from developmental relationships, potentially a mentor, potentially some sort of a buddy through the onboarding process, some sort of an executive coach, right? Whatever it is, we have to think about 20% comes from one-to-one mentorship, accountability groups, buddy programs, things that happen inside of an organization where we have one-to-one time between people. And then, of course, the 70%, what's left, what Center for Creative Leadership called undertaking challenging assignments, which is experiential learning. And so we're moving to a place where we don't want as much formal classroom training. It's just not as valuable as it was, 56 years ago. We're moving to a place where one-to-one mentorship and developmental relationships and really, really challenging assignments and projects, the experiential learning, that is going to help the millennials in your world grow and develop far more rapidly than trying to get them, a new MBA or some sort of a certification. You're just not going to get as much out of that as they are going to get through working on projects cross-functionally or doing things extracurricularly like joining a board of directors or serving on some sort of not-for-profit volunteer committee. Those are the things that are going to matter way more because it's experiential. So we got to get focused in on how do we create those structures and systems for the millennials. Through the white paper with FERF and with Robert Half, what we ended up really trying to think about was like if we could create those great mentorship structures and systems inside an organization, what do these things look like? So I'm just going to give you a couple of things that are critical here. You're welcome to go to michaellsiever.com and click on the About tab, and you can download the paper there for free if you want. And it just kind of helps you to think about this. So again, mentorship, we want to make sure that the daily and or the weekly feedback is there. Number two, we really want to make sure that those continual learning structures and systems, preferably immersive or experiential, are there. We want to make sure that there is a formal mentorship structure, but that there's also a reverse mentorship structure so that the younger person has an opportunity to provide a little bit of knowledge or training or information to a more experienced person inside your business. Sometimes I will advocate for a millennial to create what is referred to as a personal board of directors. And so this is kind of a 5 to 7 member team of people that the millennial talks to every other month. And they just create opportunities to have dinner with the person or take the person to lunch or meet for a hike or something. And they just have an opportunity to walk in with a very objective goal for learning and find ways to get the more experienced board members' feedback back down to him or her in a way that allows for their growth and development. And I just think that that's a very, very important thing. So whether it's some sort of an accountability group or some sort of personal board of directors or some sort of a coach, we want to create those opportunities for the younger persons to be able to learn through a wide variety of methods. One of the things that key to mentorship is understanding something that Dr. Daniel Sumrock, who is the director of the Center for Addiction Sciences at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center's College of Medicine, talks an awful lot about the value of relationships. And so he has this idea that, or he believes that addiction shouldn't be called addiction. He believes that it should be called a ritualized compulsive comfort seeking. He's just a really big fan of a mentor finding a way to help a young person understand that a lot of the things that they do and say today is oftentimes a very normal response to an adversity or periods of adversity that the millennial or other person experienced in his or her childhood. When we think about these, what he refers to as adverse childhood experiences, likely those adverse childhood experiences happen pretty recurrently in their teenage years or throughout their 20s. A mentor, if he or she is very, very good, is going to understand what those adverse childhood experiences are, and they're going to help to create a strategy to not only help the young person, the millennial, maybe the Gen X person, become more developed as a professional, but they're also going to help that individual become more developed in helping them overcome or become more resilient as a result of those adverse childhood experiences. I'm a big fan of having the mentor talk with the mentee or the protege about what those challenges were, what are the tools that they're utilizing to overcome those challenges, and to just be there and be a very, very good active listener to help figure out what that challenge or series of challenges was, how they've overcome it, and now how they're going to help other people in their lives overcome the same thing. So I'm a fan of this phrase. It's called "be the person you needed when you were younger." And so I'm just of the belief that the highest and best use of a person's life is to help others overcome challenges that are very similar to their own from their younger years. So if we're going to give feedback, if we're going to offer continual learning opportunities, and we're going to offer reverse mentorship or mentorship, we have to make sure that we're not just focusing in on the professional side of his or her development. We're also focusing in on the personal side of his or her development. And oftentimes that's helping a young person overcome that adverse childhood experience. A final thing here about this mentorship piece is that at the back of the Creating a Leadership Pipeline paper, we talked an awful lot about the William Bridges model of change, and how does a person through time let go of something that they don't necessarily need anymore? How do they enter into a neutral zone, and how do they begin in a new beginning? Talked about something called the Gibbs reflective cycle, and how do we get people to be very, very reflective and take the time for their own personal development. And I think that those are a couple of models that, if you look at the white paper, would really, really help you as you think about the engagement of some of the millennials maybe in your life. There's also, I believe, on page 10, a series of 9 questions that if you ask them in succession, will give you a lot of very meaningful information about the millennials that may be on your team or in your life. And then if you begin to practice some of the things that are the outcome as a result of you asking these questions, it could be very, very interesting how your capacity for mentorship or your capacity for engaging these young persons becomes far more in depth. And I think there's a lot of value in trying to figure out if we can do that or not. Page 10 of the Creating a Leadership Pipeline report could be very, very interesting in helping in that. As we kind of look through these things, right, in the last maybe hour or so, I gave you some statistics about, what does it mean to be a millennial? What were those years that those persons were, around, obviously born between 1980 and 2000, already the largest percentage of the U.S. Census, already the largest percentage of the U.S. workforce, and by 2025, they're going to be 75% of it. They prefer, experiences over products. There's all these things that are happening. Obviously, there's a lot of significant trends that are impacting their capacity to become leaders. And so being very, very aware of those trends, and are baby boomers retiring? What's the Gallup's, workforce place engagement level? They're getting married later. They just don't believe marketing and PR and advertising the same way that previous generations do. Wellness is something that's very important to them. We talked a little bit about motivators piece and what motivates their attitudes about work. And of course, Jennifer Deal's look at how all generations are way more alike than they are dissimilar. We talked a little bit about how do we get them really, really thinking about continual learning. How do we focus on societal impact? How do we deal with the higher expectations? We looked at mass customization and the 70-20-10 principle, and really doing everything that we can to think about how do we create very immersive or experiential learning opportunities for them. I think that is where there's going to be a capacity for us to create a la carte menu items within companies to create ways to want to engage them so that they feel as though they get to select what is their most unique path for them to be able to accomplish the tasks that they desire to. And then talked a little bit at the end about structures and systems with regards to mentorship and engagement of these folks. As we think about, I'm going to wrap up the podcast here, is a couple things. When we think about millennials and we think about many of the ways that they're being described in the workforce today, lazy and spoiled and narcissistic and anxious and nervous and all these things, and many of those things might be true on a case-by-case basis, but as a whole, it's just not accurate. It's a lot of fluff. There's not really any meat behind it. What we're taking into consideration many factors, but then kind of wiping away the more important ones. And what I want you to remember from this podcast is that the phase of a person's life, so in the teenage years or their 20s, and then maybe the second phase is their 30s and 40s, and maybe the third phase is a person after age 50. Those phases in a person's life and the environmental context in which he or she was raised is a far more important predictor of how that person's going to behave than the generation in which he or she belongs. The thing is that as we look at for decades now, and I've got lots of examples from the Time magazine article to the Life magazine article from the 1960s, the more experienced generation, the older generation, has always looked down on the generation that has followed them, and they've always come up with negative things to say about them. And the thing is that maybe that the more experienced generations have just forgotten what their own life self-discovery process was actually like. And maybe it's a jealousy that they wish that they could behave more like millennials, or that they would have had access to the technology that millennials have access to. I don't know exactly what it is. More experienced generations have become way more restricted, way more regimented, and way more confined to a way of life that they can't get out of. I don't think that we, quote unquote, have a millennial problem in America or even in the world. What I think is that we have an older people don't remember what it's like to be going through early life self-discovery problem. And that is a very, very big difference. And so if we could have more honest discussion and conversation about that, we're going to be in a far better place to be able to engage one another, and then to be able to engage the millennial generation. So with that, I'll close. Thank you so much for listening to episode 4, Engaging the Millennial Generation, of my podcast, Equal Chance to Be Unequal. Again, this is Michael S. Seaver. If you did enjoy this episode, please like, share, comment on this podcast on my website, michaelseaver.com, my Facebook page, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and or my YouTube channel. So thank you guys very much. Go forth and be awesome.